on this episode of Indiana Education Insight.
But what keeps kids safest, keeps us all safe at school? It's the students. The students keep us the safest.
Every week, the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents is taking you inside today's Indiana education collaboration and tomorrow's education trends. We're staying on the pulse of public school innovators throughout Indiana and beyond. Join our conversation and contribute to our upcoming topics at iapssin.org/podcast. Here's your host, Dr. J.T. Coopman.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Indiana Education Insight. I'm Dr. J.T. Coopman, Executive Director of IAPSS, and this podcast is being delivered by our IAPSS team and produced by our friends at Edge Media Studios. As Executive Director of IAPSS, I'm excited to bring you this weekly show where we will feature Indiana education innovators from all over the state, from students to superintendents. We'll also be talking to higher education leaders and educators at the state level as we work together as proactive public education advocates. That's why IAPSS is here and why we are proud to bring you this show. Every week, we are talking about trending topics in public education while bringing Indiana education innovators to hear their perspective. As with any organization, it takes great leadership to be successful, and that is one of the main missions of IAPSS, developing great school district leaders. It is always great to have experienced and passionate educational leaders joining us on the show. So let's get started with today's conversation.
Topics and trends in Indiana education.
Today's guest is Dr. Ken Folks of the East Allen Community School Corporation, where he is superintendent. Dr. Folks has been a principal, assistant superintendent, and public school superintendent. That's why we are so fortunate to have him on today's program, as he has a variety of lenses in which he can share his answers today. Dr. Folks has been a tremendous asset to public education in Indiana, and let's find out his views on the issue of school safety in Indiana public schools. Welcome, Dr. Folks. We are thrilled to have you join us for today's podcast. So, Ken, if you could talk a little bit about how long you've been involved in school safety and what got you started with this.
Well, thanks, JT, and thanks for having me on the show today. I got involved in school safety in 1999. That's when Indiana decided to have the Indiana School Safety Specialist Academy. My superintendent, Dr. Mike Salisbury at Northern Wells Community Schools, he got a letter that they needed to send a representative. I was assistant principal at Norwell High School at the time, and so he invited me to be the one to go down and get the training. And I have recertified every year since 1999. So I continue to be an Indiana School Safety Specialist. And it's kind of interesting. I went to the training, I believe it was in February. I was so excited. I learned all these things. I came back and Dr. Salisbury had me present at the school board meeting. And I had a list of a few $100s worth of materials that I thought we should buy to get us really into compliance and so that we could keep our staff and our students safe. And then I was told, I was a little surprised that the school board decided to table my request. So another month or so passed, and then I got a call, and it was the day after Columbine in 1999 in April, and Dr. Salisbury said, Ken, everything on your list, order it today. So it kind of gives you just the idea that until something really happens that's really critical, sometimes people don't do what they should do unless they're kind of forced to do it. So fortunately, the board realized that it could happen anywhere, and we started getting ready. There really wasn't a push for safety in a lot of our schools until Indiana got the Indiana School Safety Specialist Academy going. And it's been great. We are a leader. Indiana's a leader in school safety.
Well, it's unfortunate that we had to have an incident like Columbine and other issues like that to really spur the sincerity with school safety. But Indiana is a leader, and under the leadership of Dave Woodward, we're recognized throughout the country as being one of the leaders in school safety. So I understand that you actually wrote your dissertation on the topic of school safety. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was so exciting because those of us who have our PhD, a lot of people dread the dissertation. A lot of people, they put that dissertation off. But for me, I was so excited to write it because I went to Purdue West Lafayette, started my doctoral classes in 2005. And every time I wrote a paper during my studies, I wrote it on school safety. So by the time I started to put my dissertation together in 2008, it was just like, it was everything I was waiting for to write. But I felt so strongly about school safety. And I felt that if I wrote a dissertation on school safety, it would really have an impact. And it was well received. It was, I think, the first dissertation on school safety that Purdue had someone write, and it actually earned an award for dissertation of the year in the education department. But I wanted to learn more about how I could have an impact. And so writing my dissertation gave me a chance to do that.
Well, obviously, it's had a tremendous impact, and one of the things that came out of your dissertation was actually a checklist that is used, if not by all schools in the state of Indiana, many of the school districts in the state of Indiana. Why is that checklist important?
You know, a checklist is so important. I don't know about you, JT, but when I go on vacation, I make a list. Because if I don't make a list before I leave, I'm going to forget something. And I think school safety the same way. And so the Allen County School Safety Commission, which I belong to, we decided to put together a safety checklist. And when I went to do my dissertation, I did it on the safety checklist. And so I actually interviewed 6 principals from schools that were using the checklist to get feedback from them. And here's the thing that was really eye-opening. One of the questions I asked in my dissertation was, where did you learn about school safety? And all 6 principals said they learned it basically by the seat of their pants. They learned it on the job. And isn't that sad that we're not preparing our principals before they get into the job? Now that's different because of the Indiana School Safety Specialist Academy. A lot of principals are coming into the job with that training. But yeah, the checklist is just a way to make sure, did I do this? Did I do that? Things just as simple as when the school year starts, walking the perimeter of your building.
Right.
With your head custodian and looking around. Is there anything the child could get hurt on here? Is there some way that someone could access our roof? And just basic things like that. So you go through the checklist at the beginning of the year and then at the middle of the year, and you just basically go through and have we accomplished all these things.
That is a tremendous asset for all the school districts, since you have developed it and it's research-based, and it kind of indicates the things that all school districts and schools, actually, principals using this checklist, should be doing. So what do you feel like is probably the most important aspect of keeping children safe at school?
A lot of people say it's the secured entrances. They say it's the SRO, the school resource officer, the police officer that's on duty at the school. Some will say it's the video cameras. All those things are important in school safety, but what keeps kids safest, keeps us all safe at school, it's the students. The students keep us the safest. Because it's the students that usually will know if something is going on, whether it's somebody's brought a weapon, somebody's brought drugs, there's a fight plan for after school. And so what we have to do as school administrators is make sure we establish that genuine caring climate where our kids will come to us because they want to be safe too. When the kids want to be safe and they care about you and they know you care about them, they're going to come to you with information so that we can keep everyone safe. So when people ask me what keeps everybody safe at school, It's the kids.
Yeah, yeah.
If our bus drivers aren't greeting those kids in the morning when they get on the bus, and our cafeteria ladies don't know them by name and are helping them, and if our teachers and our staff and our administrators aren't open and caring, it's hard, because you have to have trust. And if you don't have that trust, it's hard to get the information that you need.
Well, that's an interesting topic that's probably overlooked, but it makes sense. Kids know what other kids are doing, and certainly with the advent of social media today, that communication spreads quickly. And if we listen to the kids, we're going to have a safe environment for the most part in our schools. So for those that believe that the unthinkable can happen in their school, how do we address that?
I would just ask people to take a look at the history of school shootings and terrorists, or should I say, intruders on campuses, and just look at that. If it can happen at a rural Amish school in Nickel Mines, Pennsylvania, it can happen anywhere. And if you look at some of the places, some of the schools that we've had shootings, it runs the whole gamut. So at this point, there shouldn't be anybody saying anymore it can't happen here. It's pretty much, unfortunately, been proven that it can happen anywhere. And so since it can happen everywhere, we've got to make sure that we're doing every single thing that we can. And we have to keep up, because things change. So we have to keep up with the changing scene in school safety as well. You mentioned the social media. We've got to be in tune to what is going on in social media. We're fortunate in East Allen County Schools. We have 5 attendance areas, 5 high schools. We have schools that feed into those 5 high schools. So we have a school resource officer in each attendance area. And that's part of the job of our school resource officer, is to monitor the social media, because sometimes you hear about things through the social media, and then you follow up on those and you avert possible problems.
Well, that's, one of the questions I had in mind, since you've been doing this for almost 20 years in studying school safety. What are some of the most dramatic changes that you've seen occur in school safety in the last 20 years?
That's a great question. And I would tell you, JT, that one of the biggest changes is when I first got involved in school safety, it was all about an intruder has been identified. Let's lock the building down. And by a lockdown, the students would get against the wall. You turn off the lights, you lock the door, and everybody would be completely quiet and just kind of wait. But the biggest change I've seen is that passive approach to keeping everyone safe is now a more active approach, where we empower people. And so now in East Allen County Schools, we've actually adopted the Ellis Protocol. The Ellis Protocol is alert, lockdown, inform, counter, and evacuate. And I would encourage people to go on our East Allen County Schools website. Our New Haven High School students made a great video that you can access on there that explains how Ellis works. But what happens in Ellis is students and staff are trained that if there is a lockdown of the building, they have choices. If they're able to evacuate, they can decide, okay, we've just been informed, that's the I in Ellis, we've been informed over the speaker, the announcements, that there's an intruder in the building, and that intruder is down near door 1 at the office. Well, I've got my band students, and we're at the back of the building, back by door 12, and we're going to get out. In case kids follow me, we've already practiced this. You know how we do this. You know where we're supposed to meet when we get outside. And so we practice that. So we have Ellis drills in East Allen County Schools. And so kids know that if there's an intruder in the building and it's announced over the PA system and they happen to be in the restroom, they know what their choices are. They can stay in that restroom. Or if they know where that intruder is and they know where they are, they can evacuate. They can get out of the building. We have PA speakers in our parking lot. So if the student's arriving late and they walk in and they hear there's an intruder in the building, they can turn around, go back to their car. And so we train students and we practice so that in the event that the unthinkable would happen, our staff and our students know what to do. And they're empowered. If they decide that the best way to stay safe is to stay in their room and lock down, then we've taught them different ways to secure the door, and then they are empowered to fight back.
Well,
so if an intruder comes through the door, they have, because what's your other choice? To sit passively and let something happen? So we actually train our students that, find something you can use as a weapon, and try to overcome the person if they come in. But we really try to train them so that that's the last resort.
Sure.
Either they've evacuated or they've secured the door well enough that no one can get in the room. But if they get in the room, we want them to have a chance.
Well, you obviously have done a great job, and through your research, your students are probably much safer, and your staff have been well drilled in these exercises. How do you notify parents in a situation like this when you have an alert that comes through, or you have somebody that's trying to breach the building?
That's a great question, and we have the school messenger system in East Allen County Schools, and so that's an automated dialing system. So quickly, someone can make a recording, whether it's the principal or it's me or an assistant superintendent. Somebody can make a recording and let the parents know that the building is on lockdown or lockout. Lockout is something is happening in the community, but there really isn't a threat right now to the school.
Right.
So everybody has been locked out. School goes on as normal, but there's no going in and out of the school at that time. Sometimes, because we serve inner city Fort Wayne all the way to the Ohio line, there are instances when we have armed people in the neighborhoods, and we get those alerts. In fact, I get what's called a 911 messaging. And so when there's a 911 call, I get the information by text on my phone. And I can find it. So it'll say man armed with a knife in such and such block of South Anthony Boulevard. I can look immediately where that location is, where our closest school is, and then we can decide, we better lock out, because what if that person, flees towards one of our building and wants to seek refuge in a building? So, but you talk about, JT, how things have changed. What a change that is. I get the 911 calls from dispatch, so I know what's going on in the community. I get them 24/7. So that's another way that we can help keep our kids safe. And there's been several occasions this school year where we have locked out. We've delayed buses because there may be an armed robbery in progress near a neighborhood where our students live. So we keep the kids at school until and actually on the 911 messaging, I get the all clear. So we stay locked down or locked out or hold buses until we get the all clear from the Fort Wayne Police Department. So
that's a tremendous asset for you and your school district, because I know that you have one of the largest school districts in the state of Indiana, and it stretches over many square miles, and with 5 high schools from one end to the other and all of your other middle schools and elementary schools in between. The use of the 911 and the text messaging and those kinds of things have been a tremendous asset for you and your school district especially. Are there some what you refer to as must-dos as far as security is concerned in schools?
absolutely, there are some must-dos in my opinion. And you ask how things have changed. One of the things that have changed since 1999 is secure entrances. We have embarked in East Allen County Schools on a building project, actually an $87.5 million building project to renovate and build our schools in the district. But the highest priority in this whole project is secure entrances. We already have 3 secure entrances at our 16 schools, but by the end of this summer, actually I should say by the end of the summer, we'll have secure entrances at most of our schools. Right now, it's not that we don't have secure entrances. For example, I'm sitting right across the parking lot right now from New Haven High School. New Haven High School does not have a secure entrance, but they do have the buzzer system. They do have the doors all the doors are locked. And to get into the building, you have to press a button and talk to someone inside the building, identify who you are, and then they can grant you permission. They electronically can unlock the door and give you access to the building. But right now at New Haven High School, when you're given access, you go right into the hallway where the students are, because the door is a little ways away from the front office. And so in the meantime, we have hired, we call them greeters. We have a person that once you're buzzed in, you go to the table right inside the door. They ask you questions, they give you a visitor's badge, and then you're allowed access to the building. But when we build these secure entrances, you'll walk in off of the sidewalk into a pretty much like a holding area, which all is in glass, and it's right by the office. So the person at the front desk can see your entire body while they're talking to you on the intercom system, but they can see if you might be concealing something. They can look at your body language to see if you're nervous, upset, if you're angry. And if so, they might not allow you immediate access. It might notify the principal and say, I've got somebody here. I'm not going to buzz them in right now because they're just not acting normal. And so all of our schools within the next 2 years will have those secure entrances. So I think that's a must do. I think numbered doors is a must do. Make sure all of your entrances are numbered. So some of our buildings are very large. So those emergency responders can go right to where that student or staff member is that needs immediate attention. Mm-hmm. That's what you want. Also, if there's the numbered doors tells somebody exactly where they need to know. So if we have an intruder and they're in the vicinity of door 3, we can tell the first responders the intruder is inside right. Door 3. So having numbered doors, I think, is critical. One of the most critical things, though, involves human capital, and that's training your staff and training your students. Staff training is very, very important. I feel like you need to empower staff members to lock down a building, and you need to empower them to call 911. Because if there's an emergency and a staff member feels like they've got to contact the principal first, they're losing all that valuable time. So you have to practice. So dispatch allows our teachers to practice calling 911 to make sure that the phone in their classroom actually works and you can dial 911 out. So they have practice doing that. And then all of the phones in our buildings, you can access the intercom. So teachers know how to make an all call for the entire building. And so we train our staff. So the very first day, usually the first day of school is a non-student day. And so I always, as a principal, always required all the staff members sometime during that day, they had to get on and make an announcement on the PA. So they were comfortable doing that from their room.
Interesting.
On the first day before students even are present, we do a lockdown drill with the staff, just so you have new staff members, you have people that need a little reminder. So training your staff is really important. And I think in a minute we'll talk about tabletop exercises, and that's another way to train staff. And you also have to train your students. By nature, our kids they're nice, they're friendly, and they're helpful.
Right.
If someone who looks like a responsible adult comes to a locked door, students they'll open the door and they'll let them in. But so we have to train our students that you don't let anybody in, you don't open a locked door. So that's important. We need to train students about putting information on the internet, because they may be talking to somebody on the internet that they think is someone their age, and it's actually someone who's not their age. Mm-hmm. Told them all kinds of information about them and where they go to school. And the next thing you know, we have someone showing up, at our school building that is a person that we don't want at our school buildings.
Right.
So the student training is really important too. Another must do is your school needs to be part of a countywide school safety commission, because networking is how we all learn from each other. Actually, we have statute, an Indiana code that requires it. You must have a school safety commission in your county. So that's a must do. Establishing relationships with law enforcement. Law enforcement, the first time they come to your building shouldn't be when you have a problem. They should already know you.
Right.
They should know the building. Invite them in for lunch. Buy them lunch. Tell them they're always welcome to come to your school for lunch, and make sure you have that relationship. And then another thing that I always did as a principal, and every year I get to teach the brand new School Safety Specialist Academy, the basics. There's like 500 new School Safety Specialist Academies candidates every year. And one of the things I teach them about are called student safety councils. And in a student safety council, you pick a cross section of your student body. So, maybe about 20 or 25 kids. And then you arrange chairs in a circle. You invite in a few adults, maybe a law enforcement officer and a teacher and maybe secretary and custodian. and you sit around and you ask kids questions. Do you feel safe at this school? If not, why don't you feel safe?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about locker searches? And JT is interesting. You think kids wouldn't want locker searches. Most of the kids say, yeah, they want locker searches because they trust themselves. They know they're not going to bring something to school they're not supposed to,
Right.
but they're not sure about their peers.
Yep.
Ask kids about locker searches, they're like, yeah, I think we should have locker searches. And but those are some of the must-dos that you should do.
That's an absolute great list for all school districts to have at their disposal. Now, do you have school resource officers, SROs, and what is their role?
The school resource officer, yes, we have one in each attendance area, so I've got 5. And their role is basically, I like to describe it as officer friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They're there as a person to help.
Right.
And the thing about our officers is that New Haven Police Department and the Allen County Sheriff's Department, they allow us to interview our SROs. They're not just assigned. We get to interview them, and we're looking for, that teacher quality. We're looking for that kind of person that likes kids, that is approachable, that wants to help kids out. And so even though our officers at times have to do investigations because there's criminal violations at school, it's basically they're another staff member that the kids get to know, the kids get to trust, and they know that that person is there to help them. But the SRO really does come in handy, because if we have a situation that requires law enforcement, the person's available and there. And if we have an armed intruder come into a building, we've at least got an armed person. We've got a trained armed person to give us a fighting chance.
Well, with the SRO, and especially if they've developed a relationship with your students, the whole idea of see something, say something could avert a disaster if they have that good relationship with your students.
Absolutely. Yes.
So I've heard you say before that school safety is not about convenience. What do you mean by that?
When you make a school safe, you're going to inconvenience people. The secure entrances, that inconveniences people. When you have all of your doors locked and you have to walk all the way around to a certain part of the building to access the building, that inconveniences people. And so what we always say to people who complain about our safety procedures is that we'll take the complaint. We would rather err on the side of safety. Yep. We're sorry that you're inconvenienced, but I'd like you to understand why we're doing this.
Yep.
We're trying to keep everybody safe. Because if you're in our building, you may be approached by a staff member, that wants to make sure you're supposed to be there. They'll be looking for that ID badge, that visitor badge that you're supposed to have. And this is something I wanted to mention earlier too. We talked about staff training. We always train staff members when they see someone in the building they don't recognize to approach them. And don't ask them, can I help you? Because they'll say no, and they'll just keep walking right by you. Ask them, how may I help you? By asking that open-ended question, you can engage them in a conversation. You can learn a little bit more about them. I actually have a story to tell. I was a pretty brash principal because I know school safety. And so I challenged the Allen County Sheriff's Department. I said, you can't get in my building. Well, of course, they got in the building. And they had a plainclothes police officer. She looked like she was probably a teacher or a substitute teacher. She got in and she walked around. We followed her on the cameras, and she walked around for about a half an hour. Now, the Allen County Sheriff's Department, they chose a day where they knew that I wasn't going to be there and my assistant principal wasn't going to be there, but that doesn't matter. We still need to keep safe. But what happened is one of those students who was friendly opened the door for her and let her in, and she just walked around. And so here's what happened. So the next day, when I was told about this, I had a staff meeting, and I kind of told my staff, look, she's walking right by you. She's walking right by you. You're trained to ask people, how may I help you? Yeah. So after that, JT, anybody that came in the building, if it was the Pepsi guy or the 7-Up guy or the Coke guy, or it was the UPS, even though they had the uniform on, my staff members were approaching them. How may I help you? And so sometimes you just have to have that wake-up call.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
that really helped us out.
seeing your lanyard around your neck as your ID badge, there have been times when I've actually seen you out of the school district with your ID lanyard around your neck, because that's just part of what you do as part of your daily routine.
Yeah,
So those ID badges are very helpful.
they're really helpful. You know, you get dressed every day to come to work, right? And this is the way I dress to come to work. And if I don't have this on, I'm not dressed for work.
Yeah.
So I wear this all the time, and it helps when I go into the building. It identifies who I am, that I'm supposed to be there. And then on the back, it's got a little cheat sheet. And so if we have a lockdown, I can look right here and I can see instructions of what I'm supposed to do. If it's a lock out, if it's a lock down.
Right.
And all of our teachers have these. When I first got into school safety, we used to put them on the back of the picture, on the back of the card. But as we updated things, we found out we were replacing cards more often than we want to replace cards. So now what we do is we just have a little extra clip on, a little card here. So when we update those, we don't have to reprint all the ID badges. We just clip that onto the back. So just about everything I need to know is on here, because when you have a crisis, it's going to be hard to think straight. The adrenaline's going to be pumping, and the simplest thing almost becomes impossible.
Yeah.
So if I can just take a deep breath and I go, okay, we've got a lockout. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to secure the building, return to the inside of the building, lock all my doors, take attendance and report concerns. No one comes in or out of the building. I have an increased awareness, and it's business as usual inside the building. So I don't have to think about that. And even if it was more like a lockdown, it tells me exactly what I do.
Yeah.
A lockdown on the back of this. And that's just I think that's another, talked about must-dos.
Yeah, right.
Is to wear your ID badges and have the information right on your ID badge in case there's a crisis. You know exactly what you're supposed to do.
That's a great idea. So in closing, Dr. Folks, do you have any advice that you'd like to offer to future or current school leaders about school safety?
One piece of advice that I always share with everyone is, first of all, the school safety checklist. That's been shared the entire state. I think most of the state uses this now.
Right.
And that's really important. And as you go through the checklist, there's different categories about staff training and student training and practice drills and all those kinds of things. And one of the things on here are tabletop exercises. So I didn't want to get off the air without mentioning this. A tabletop exercise is a simulation. And the best tabletop exercises are simulations that you write yourself. So the staff or the SRO or the administration writes a tabletop. One of my favorite tabletops that was written in Northwest Allen County Schools by the SRO and a principal and an assistant principal is about an intruder. And it could happen anywhere to any school. And the scenario is that you're teaching class as a teacher, and a well-dressed adult comes to your door of your classroom, and the teacher goes to the door, opens the door to talk to the person. Well, they've just opened the door to a parent who's in a custody issue, trying to access their child who they don't have access to. And it becomes a very confrontational thing. So here's the thing about tabletops, JT. If you practice this ahead of time, when the real thing happens, you've already been through it.
Right.
So you kind of know what to do. When you're thinking about it fresh for the very first time, you may make a mistake. The mistake that was made here in the simulation is the teacher opened the door. Well, here's the deal. An adult, an unannounced adult that you don't recognize should never come to your classroom door. You should have gotten a call from the principal, or the principal would accompany them. But even though they look like no threat to you, if you were not expecting them, you never open your door.
Yep.
And when you get staff around a table where they can talk about this and they can practice this, that sticks with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the real thing happens, and here you go with your convenience thing. So JT, that may have been a parent who had a legitimate reason to come to that classroom, okay? And now they feel like they're inconvenienced because why didn't you open the door for me? Because you didn't follow protocol.
Right.
That's why I didn't open the door.
Yeah.
I apologize that you were inconvenienced, but I hope you know I've got 30 students inside this classroom, and I'm responsible for all 30 of them.
Yeah.
And if you're supposed to be in my classroom, We'll get you there eventually, but I'm calling the office first. I've got an adult outside my door. I don't recognize them. Could someone please come down and figure out what's going on? And if you do that as a practice exercise, when the real thing happens, you're good to go.
Yep. Well, you've done some great training, and your research has been phenomenal in the area of school safety. And I certainly want to thank Dr. Ken Fulks for being our guest on IEPSS's edition of Indiana Education Insight. Thank you, Dr. Fulks.
Thanks, JT.
Up next, we're featuring a national education online trend that is relevant to our local Indiana institutions. This is a must-pay attention moment, and that's right now.
A national trend that's impacting Indiana. It's time to bring in our featured panel for 5 on 5. 5 questions for our experts, 5 expert answers.
Joining us in studio is Dr. Joanne Jewett, Chief Accessibility Officer at Site Strategics. The last show we talked about disabilities, and this time we're going to go a little bit deeper into that topic. Welcome, Joanne. We're so glad to have you with us today. And we have some questions that we're going to address with you, is so that generally, how are disabilities defined?
Well, in the world of web accessibility compliance, we don't really rely so much on medical definitions, so I think we would automatically think about it that way. But instead, we look for the legal definition of disabilities, and that relies on the concept of impact. So if a person who has some physical or mental impairment that impacts or limits their activity, that's what we consider to be a disability.
Okay. Well, that's a great definition. And are there basic categories of disabilities?
Yes, there are. Ones that I think most of us would think very quickly about would be visual disabilities, hearing impairments, hearing disabilities, but there are also cognitive disabilities, psychological disabilities, mobility, of course, and that comes with a lot of different aspects. And there are those who have multiple disabilities, so they could have one or more, maybe visual and mobile disabilities.
Okay. Now, those are pretty apparent to us, but there also are invisible disabilities. What are invisible disabilities?
Invisible disabilities, which is probably the fastest growing area of disability, those are cognitive, emotional, and psychological disabilities. And in particular, I think we would find in our schools that any form of learning disability would fall under the invisible categories. Oftentimes we don't know that a student has an issue with reading, for instance, or comprehension, but it also could be anxiety. And we see that with our students as well. Could be pain, fatigue, something brought on by an injury, but those are temporary, but they're also disabilities.
Okay. So with so many disabilities and the diversity of those disabilities, how can the web be accessible for many of its potential users?
It can be, that is a great way to say it, that it can be accessible for many of the users. The web cannot be all things to all people. So what we try to do is to develop and design websites to meet the WCAG 2.0 Level A, Level 2 guidelines as much as possible. That covers the broadest area. And we always know that someone somewhere may fall between the cracks, but we do try to design according to the guidelines to meet the majority of the needs.
Okay. Well, are there other situations beyond defined disabilities in which people may encounter barriers in using the website?
Yes, there are. I had mentioned earlier about the temporary disabilities. So we have people who've encountered some kind of injury or illness. And so let's say I have a broken arm, so I'm not really going to be able to use that mouse, and I'm going to have to use a keyboard in order to get through a website. Cultural change. People don't think about those who have English as a second language may find that websites are a barrier to them. Okay. And there are also technology limitations. I know that you and I have talked before about the rural nature of so many of our schools, and if you're still on dial-up, or you don't really have the technology to access what's on a website, then that becomes a limitation as well.
Interesting. Well, Dr. Jewett, I want to thank you for all of your expertise in the areas of accessibility for disabled people for the website. It's been a learning experience for me, and I'm sure for everyone that's listening in. I want to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Now it's time to wrap up this episode with my take on the current state of affairs in the Indiana education landscape.
Dr. JT's closing comments.
Unfortunately, even though we have so much research about how high-quality schools, much of this research has been dismissed by our legislators. The same appears to be true with the new Trump administration and the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. As we made headway with the revision of No Child Left Behind, with the rewriting of the Every Student Succeeds Act, this administration appears to want to dismantle it in favor of charter schools and vouchers. And all along with the billions of dollars that are purportedly being reduced in the title programs aimed at helping disadvantaged youth and families. When we ask how we plan to help these kids and their families, the reply was, can you help us cut $9 billion in wasted money going to public schools? We had a chance to get it right, but missed a golden opportunity. Perhaps we can pursue this and other issues in the next segment of the Indiana Education Insight. Our next show, we welcome Dr. Brian Smith, Executive Director of the Indiana School Boards Association, and perhaps Dr. Smith can provide some additional insight into the State House and education issues. Join us for that and more on the next Insight into Indiana Education, and thanks for being part of education. Please stand up for Indiana Public Schools.